May 12, 1945. A clearing in a pine forest a few kilometers outside Munich, Germany. The air is cold for late spring, heavy with the scent of damp earth, resin, and the sharp chemical bite of lye soap. It's a smell that clings to everything here. It is the smell of surrender. For Hanna Richter, former Oberfunkerin with the Luftwaffe, the world has shrunk to the back of a canvas-topped GMC CCKW truck, its engine rumbling a low, constant threat. For 2 days, this truck has been her world. The rhythmic shudder of the chassis, the groan of the transmission, the faces of the other women packed in beside her, all strangers, all wearing the same expression of hollowed-out shock. They are the remnants of a shattered nation, a collection of secretaries, telephone operators, and anti-aircraft auxiliaries swept up in the final, chaotic collapse of the Third Reich. Their gray-blue Luftwaffe Helferin uniforms are stained with mud and days of fear. The truck lurches to a final, definitive halt. The canvas flap is thrown back, and the harsh daylight makes them flinch. Raus. The command is in German, but the accent is American, flat and impatient. A young GI, no older than Hanna, stands there, M1 Garand held loosely across his chest. He isn't menacing, just tired. Exhaustion is the universal language here. One by one, the women climb down, their limbs stiff and clumsy. They stand in a ragged line on the muddy ground, blinking at their new reality, a sprawling city of olive-drab tents under the silent watch of the tall pines. This is U.S. Army Field Hospital 21, a processing point for the thousands of German soldiers and now women surrendering in the Bavarian sector. Barbed wire is strung between posts, but it seems almost perfunctory. There is nowhere left to run. You are standing in that line. You feel the grit under your worn-out shoes. You hear the murmur of English, a language you've only ever heard crackling with static over a headset, the voice of an enemy pilot. Now it is the sound of your keepers. A sergeant with a clipboard and a wary face walks down the line, his boots squelching in the mud. He points. Name, rank, name, rank. The litany begins. Each woman answers in a small, tight voice. When he gets to Hanna, she has to swallow twice before the words will come. Hanna Richter, Oberfunkerin. The sergeant doesn't even look up. He just makes a tick on his list. She is no longer Hanna Richter, a girl who once dreamed of being a librarian and who was good at Morse code. She is a number on a page, a piece of human inventory to be processed. The cold seeps deeper than the damp air. It settles in her bones. This is the absolute zero of defeat. They are marched past rows of tents where male prisoners stare out with vacant eyes. The women keep their gaze fixed forward, pulling what little dignity they have left around them like a threadbare coat. They are led to a large, long tent, the canvas flaps tied open. A sign nailed to a wooden post reads medical intake in stark black letters. Inside, the smell of disinfectant is overpowering. It's a clean smell, a sterile smell, and yet it feels more threatening than the honest dirt of the forest. 2 American officers stand near the entrance. One, a doctor, a captain by the silver bars on his collar, looks them over with a clinical, detached gaze. The other, a younger lieutenant, gives an order to the guards. The women are herded aside, the canvas flap dropping behind them, sealing them in. The light inside is dim, cast by a few bare bulbs hanging from the tent's central ridgepole. The space is vast and open, the ground covered with wooden floorboards. Down the length of the tent are a dozen simple army cots, spaced several feet apart, and waiting by them are the doctors. All of them men, all of them the enemy. A new kind of fear, colder and sharper than anything felt during the bombing raids, begins its slow, icy crawl upon a spine. The inside of the medical tent is a study in brutal efficiency. The bare bulbs hanging from the canvas ceiling cast a harsh, unforgiving glare, leaching the color from every surface and every face. There are no partitions, no screens, no hint of privacy. It is one vast open room, a human warehouse where the only furniture is the line of drab olive cots. The floorboards, recently scrubbed, are still damp, and the air hangs thick with the smell of carbolic soap and fear. At each station, a male doctor waits with a medical corpsman. They are young men, most of them, their faces betraying a weariness that goes beyond simple fatigue. They have seen the horrors of Dachau, just 30 kilometers away. They have treated shattered bodies from the final, pointless battles around Munich. To them, this is just another task in a long line of grim duties, processing the vanquished. They speak to each other in low tones, their English a meaningless hum to Hanna and the others. Their movements are detached, clinical. They are here to do a job. A sharp command cuts through the nervous silence. An American sergeant, the same one from outside, stands in the center of the tent. A German-speaking corporal stands beside him, ready to translate. You will remove all of your clothing. the corporal announces, his own voice strained, avoiding the eyes of the women before him. Place them in the sack provided. You will then proceed to the nearest cot for a medical examination. This is for delousing and to check for disease. It is mandatory. Begin now. The words hang in the air, heavy and obscene. For a moment, there is absolute stillness. The women stare at the corporal, then at the doctors, then at each other. You can feel the collective intake of breath, the sudden, sharp spike of panic. They have heard the stories. For years, Goebbels' propaganda machine had filled their heads with tales of the subhuman Allied brutes, of what would happen to German women who fell into their hands. Now they are being ordered to stand naked before them in a brightly lit room. A few women begin to cry, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on their faces. Others simply stare into the middle distance, their expressions vacant, as if their minds have fled to a place their bodies cannot. Hannah feels her own limbs turn to lead. Her fingers, which could once dance over a telegraph key, are numb and useless at her sides. She cannot make them unbutton her tunic. The order is an impossibility, a violation that her entire being rebels against. She watches as one of the younger girls, barely 17, is prodded forward by a guard. The girl shakes her head, muttering, 9, 9, 9. Her movements are jerky, animalistic. She is a cornered creature. The doctor at the first station, a tall, thin man with glasses, sighs in exasperation. He says something to the guard, his tone clipped and impatient. He has a schedule to keep. He has hundreds of prisoners to process. This is not defiance. It is something deeper. It is the complete shutdown of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming terror. It is a psychological freezing, a state of tonic immobility, where the body becomes a statue, a fortress against a perceived final assault. Hannah feels it happening to herself. The room seems to tilt. The doctor's faces blur. The sounds become distant, as if coming from underwater. She is there, but she is also gone. The deadlock stretches for what feels like an eternity. The American doctors grow more frustrated. They see stubbornness, insubordination. The captain in charge strides into the middle of the tent. "What's the holdup, Sergeant?" he barks. The sergeant gestures helplessly at the frozen women. "They won't cooperate, sir." The captain's face hardens. He has no time for this. He turns to the German-speaking corporal. "Tell them they have 1 minute to comply, or we'll have the guards strip them by force." The corporal's translation is flat, devoid of emotion, but the threat lands like a physical blow. The women recoil. The crying becomes audible sobs. But still they do not move. They cannot. They are statues of fear, locked in a state beyond reason or command. The captain looks at his watch, his jaw tight. The tension in the tent becomes a physical presence, a suffocating pressure that promises to erupt into violence.
Just beyond the entrance flap of the medical tent, Second Lieutenant Eleanor Vance of the U.S. Army Nurse Corps watches the scene unfold. She had been on her way to the surgical ward when the shouting started. Now she stands half-hidden by the canvas, her blue-gray seersucker dress and simple white apron a stark contrast to the olive drab of the soldiers. At 26, Eleanor has seen more than most people would in 3 lifetimes. She was at Anzio. She has dressed wounds that defied medical textbooks and held the hands of boys as they died, boys who looked just like the guards inside this tent. She has learned to read the nuances of human suffering with an expert's eye, and what she sees in there is not defiance. It is sheer, unadulterated terror. She sees the rigid postures, the 1,000-yard stares, the subtle, uncontrollable trembling. She has seen it before in shell-shocked GIs pulled from the front lines. It is the look of a soul that has retreated so far inside itself that no order can reach it. She watches as Captain Miller, the doctor in charge, grows increasingly agitated. He is a good surgeon, but his bedside manner, especially with the enemy, is non-existent. He sees a problem of logistics, of insubordination holding up his timetable. Eleanor sees a room full of traumatized women being pushed past their breaking point. She straightens her shoulders and steps into the tent. The air is thick with tension. "Captain Miller?" she says, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the standoff. Miller turns, annoyed by the interruption. "What is it, Lieutenant? I'm busy." Eleanor meets his gaze directly. "Sir, with respect, this isn't working." "I can see that," he snaps. "They're refusing a direct order." "They aren't refusing, Captain," she corrects him gently. "They can't. They're terrified." Miller scoffs, a dismissive, ugly sound. "They're the enemy, Vance. I don't have time to hold their hands. We need to screen them for typhus and get them moved out." He turns away, intending to give the order to the guards. Eleanor steps in front of him. This is a breach of protocol, a challenge to his authority, and she knows it. But she also knows that what is about to happen is fundamentally wrong, and worse, fundamentally counterproductive. "Sir, give me 5 minutes, please." Miller stares at her, his anger warring with a flicker of curiosity. Vance is one of his best nurses, not known for dramatics. 5 minutes for what? He demands. "To do it a different way," she replies. "Look at them, sir. They aren't soldiers. They're clerks, telephone operators. They're scared to death of these men, of us. They expect the worst. And we're ordering them to strip in a room full of foreign soldiers. What do you think is going through their minds?" She pauses, letting the words sink in. "We're not going to get their cooperation with threats. We'll get it with a little dignity." Miller hesitates. The shouting has solved nothing. The guards look uncomfortable. He glances at the line of frozen German women. He's a doctor, after all. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't get suspended for a gray uniform. "What's your idea?" he asks, his voice grudging. "Privacy," Eleanor says, the word itself seeming alien in this context. It's all it is, just a little privacy. She turns to 2 other nurses who had been drawn by the commotion. "Mary, Catherine, help me. Find every spare blanket, sheet, and shelter half you can get your hands on. We're going to build some walls." The other nurses look from Eleanor to the captain, awaiting his approval. Miller scrubs a hand over his face, the picture of weary frustration. He looks at the silent, terrified women. He looks at the determined face of Lieutenant Vance. This is not in any field manual, but the current method has resulted in a complete and total standstill. "All right, Vance," he finally concedes, his voice low. "You have your 5 minutes. Show me." Eleanor gives a single, sharp nod. The command is all she needs. She and the other nurses hurry out of the tent, their movements precise and full of purpose. They are not just gathering blankets. They are gathering the materials to draw an unseen line between military procedure and basic human decency.
From inside her prison of fear, Hannah Richter watches the American nurse approach. She had seen the woman talking to the angry officer, had seen her leave and now return, followed by 2 other nurses. Their arms are full of coarse, brown army blankets. Hannah braces herself. Perhaps this is a new tactic, a new humiliation. She anticipates being roughly handled, forcibly undressed. The fear is a physical thing, a cold weight in her stomach. But the nurse, the one they call Vance, does not move towards her with aggression. Instead, she stops a few feet away, making eye contact. Hannah flinches, expecting to see contempt, hatred, the victor's glare. But she sees none of it. The American woman's eyes are clear and professional. They hold a look of not pity, but something like clinical understanding. It is the first time since her capture that one of her keepers has looked at her as a person and not an object. Lieutenant Vance hands a blanket to another nurse. Then, with quiet efficiency, they begin to work. 2 corpsmen are beckoned over and instructed to hold the corners of one blanket high, stretching it between them to form a screen. Another blanket is draped over a rope hastily strung between 2 of the tent's support poles. In less than a minute, they have created a small 3-walled enclosure around the first cot, a makeshift room, a sanctuary of privacy in the vast exposed space. The world outside this little fabric cell, with its staring guards, its frustrated doctors, its rows of other terrified women, is suddenly blocked from view. The effect is instantaneous and profound. You can almost feel the collective tension in the tent drop by a crucial degree. It is as if a high-pitched, unbearable noise has suddenly been switched off. Lieutenant Vance steps up to the opening of the newly created space. She gestures for Hannah to enter. Her movements are calm, her expression neutral. She says a few words in English, but the tone is what communicates everything. It is not an order, it is an invitation. Hesitantly, Hannah takes a step forward, then another, her legs feeling unsteady. She steps past the blanket into the small, secluded area. Inside, it is just the cot, the doctor, and Lieutenant Vance. The doctor himself seems different in here, less an imposing figure of authority, and more just a man waiting to do his job. The world has been reduced to a manageable size. Vance then does something simple yet monumental. She takes the edge of the final blanket and pulls it across the entrance, closing Hannah off from the rest of the tent. The sound is small, just the soft whisk of rough wool fabric sliding against a pole, but it lands with the force of a thunderclap. In the sudden enclosed quiet, Hannah stands trembling. The paralysis has not vanished entirely, but its icy grip has loosened. She can feel her own fingers again. She can breathe. Lieutenant Vance turns to her and gestures towards her uniform tunic, then points to the cot. She says a single word, slowly, enunciating it carefully in clumsy German.
bitte, please, not raus or schnell, just please. And that one small word, offered in this small, private space, changes everything. The years of propaganda, the terror of capture, the humiliation of the last 48 hours, it all begins to recede, replaced by a simple human interaction. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Hannah reaches for the top button of her uniform tunic. She can do this. Here, shielded from the eyes of the world, she can. The examination begins, not as an act of dominance, but as a medical procedure. Through a tiny gap in the blankets, Hannah catches a glimpse of the next station, where another makeshift curtain is being erected. A wave of something she cannot name, relief, gratitude, a fragile flicker of hope, washes over her. The sound of a drawn blanket has become the sound of her humanity being handed back to her.
The change rippled down the length of the tent, one blanket-walled cubicle at a time. What had been a scene of tense, silent rebellion transformed into one of quiet, orderly procedure. The air, once thick with confrontation, now held a low hum of activity. Nurses and corpsmen moved with purpose, striding ropes and draping shelter halves, their actions creating a series of intimate spaces where there had only been a cold, open floor. The German women, watching this new system take shape, began to unfreeze. As each was led into her own private enclosure, the rigid posture would soften, the blank stare would recede. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath the surface, but it was no longer paralyzing. Shielded from public view, they could comply with the orders without feeling utterly violated. The doctors, initially skeptical of Vance's interruption, quickly saw the results. Their work, which had ground to a complete halt, was now proceeding at a faster and more efficient pace than they could have imagined. There was no more shouting, no more need for threats. The examinations were completed in minutes. Blood was drawn, delousing powder was applied, and notes were made with a quiet professionalism that had been impossible just a short time before. Captain Miller stood near the entrance, arms crossed, observing the new workflow. He watched Lieutenant Vance move from one station to the next, offering a quiet word, a reassuring gesture. She was not coddling the enemy. She was managing a crisis with an insight he had completely lacked. He had seen the women as a single, homogeneous entity, the German POW. She had seen them as individuals, as women who were scared and ashamed. She understood that dignity was not a luxury to be afforded only to allies. Sometimes it was a practical tool, a key to unlocking cooperation where force and authority had failed. He caught her eye across the tent and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was an admission of his own failure and an acknowledgement of her success. The simple, profound intelligence of her solution was undeniable. For Hannah Richter, dressed now in a loose-fitting, shapeless set of GI fatigues, the world felt fundamentally altered. The medical examination itself had been a swift, impersonal affair. But the act that preceded it, the closing of the curtain, had been a moment of grace in a world that seemed to have none left. It was a small thing, a piece of cloth, a moment of privacy, but it suggested that perhaps the monsters of the propaganda were not real. It suggested that even here, in the heart of defeat, amongst the enemy, a flicker of shared humanity could exist. She and the other women were led from the medical tent to another, larger enclosure, where they would be held before being transferred to a more permanent camp. Their futures remained a terrifying blank. They were still prisoners, their country was in ruins, their families scattered or gone. Nothing about their dire situation had truly changed. And yet something had. The experience in the medical tent had planted a tiny, fragile seed. It was the idea that survival might not just be a matter of enduring brutality, but of encountering unexpected moments of decency. You are standing with them now in the new tent, watching the afternoon light filter through the canvas. The air still smells of disinfectant, but it is no longer the smell of terror. It is simply the smell of a hospital. Outside, Lieutenant Eleanor Vance watches the last of the women from that first group being processed. Her face is tired, smudged with dirt, but her expression is one of calm resolve. She had not won a battle or liberated a town. She had simply closed a curtain. But in doing so, she had affirmed a truth more powerful than any army, that a measure of grace, offered even to a defeated enemy, is not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength. It is the quiet insistence that even at the end of all things, we are still human.